Hi, everyone. Welcome, welcome. All right, folks. Looking forward to seeing your definitions of leadership. And panelists, please feel free to add to the chat as well if you would like to finish the sentence. Leadership is. I'll read aloud. Leadership is centering authentic relationships. Leadership is taking responsibility for what matters to you. Dave, this one hits close to home. Leadership is hard. Yeah, right on. Chantel says leadership is creating safe spaces for communities to interact and sustainably grow. Yes, well done. All right, well, we all have our own unique understanding of leadership, but we come together in curiosity, right? With curiosity to talk about how we distribute that. And Chantel, actually, that was the perfect segue because I think distributed leadership really does allow those safe spaces for interaction and sustainable growth. So great segue. Thanks, Chantel. With that, we're going to introduce our panelists for today. We are in session 3 of a 4-part webinar series, and I'm so excited to bring to you Dr. Brady from National School District, some folks from the University of California, San Diego, Dave Troutman and Alan Daly, and then, of course, my colleague from the Learner-Centered Collaborative, Liz Perry. So excited to welcome them to the webinar today and for you all to hear their story in just a few minutes. And then, as always, I am Brittany Griffin, your host for today's webinar. Really excited to see so many friendly faces joining us again for week 3. And as we mentioned in the chat, if at any time a question or an idea bubbles up for you, it's a warm, friendly group. Feel free to use the chat to back channel or the Q&A tool within the webinar functionality to send along your thoughts. And we'll make sure we keep an eye on that throughout today's webinar. So with that, we're going to start with why we're here. And distributed leadership is a very focused topic, but it connects to our broader vision, where we want education ecosystems in which all learners know who they are, thrive in community, and actively engage in the world as their best selves. And hopefully to accomplish that, through distributed leadership, we've designed this 4-part webinar series. As I mentioned before, we are thinking today about asset mapping for leadership. So who is your network for distributed leadership? And then we will culminate on next Monday's webinar by bringing a big idea to life. In previous webinars, we've heard from a variety of excellent panelists. You might remember we talked about the Heifetz approach, right? The balcony and the dance floor, adaptive and technical challenges when we heard from Contessa in Muhlenberg County and from San Marcos Unified as well. We also last week heard from Escondido Union and Laguna Beach when we talked about the learner-centered collaborative enabling conditions. So lots of different change management frameworks that we've introduced, and even today we'll explore some more. But if you missed any of those previous sessions, they are all recorded, and I highly recommend you tune in for the panelist stories. So we've got a 4-part series. What will you have at the very end? Well, we commit that you'll have a deeper understanding, having self-assessed your own enabling conditions in your context. That was on our last week's webinar. An asset map of leadership contributors, and that's today. And on our next call, a plan to activate distributed leadership in your unique context. And through building those things, we hope that you feel deeply connected, part of a community in which your questions, your ideas are deeply valued, and you both build trust in yourself as a leader and feel more prepared to trust others as you distribute leadership. So with that, we're going to recap the flow for the day. It's the same as the previous webinars. Do a little bit of connection and framing, jump into the panelist interview, my favorite part, and then give you some time and space in breakout rooms to do some thinking and some noodling, both individually and collaboratively. And then we'll come back together and reflect and close out. All right, with that, I'll do a very quick summary of some of the frameworks that we've talked about thus far to cue us up for our panel interview. Katie Martin, Dr. Katie Martin, who is co-CEO here at the Learner-Centered Collaboratives, I think summed it up really beautifully. There is tremendous power in people, not just programs, to make the changes we seek in education. And for me, that's the truth, right? That is the truth that we're seeking today is how do we leverage and build capacity in the people in our systems that's critical for distributed leadership. You might remember in a previous webinar, Devin talked to us about his PhD and how he designed this triple Venn diagram, if you will, defining learner-centered leadership, where we're talking about the magical intersection between purpose, participation, and feedback through the lens of leadership. We also, of course, talked about HIFITs, right? We talked about technical problems and adaptive challenges and how there are different approaches that a leader can and should take when tackling either of these opportunities. So thinking about when you're grappling with a challenge in your system, is it technical or is it adaptive, is a great place to start. And we also framed one additional framework. We framed out our learner-centered ecosystem, knowing that as you're using distributed leadership to impact change on any layer of this marble, whether it be the outcomes that you want for students, the teaching and learning experiences that your teachers create to get to those whole learner outcomes, the school design structures that allow that sort of teaching to happen, to allow you to get to those outcomes, the enabling conditions or the culture, it's all interconnected and very much an ecosystem, right? So a butterfly flaps its wings in culture, it can have an impact all the way down in the whole learner outcomes. We spent some time on our last webinar really zooming in on enabling conditions and how we can leverage distributed leadership to deeply impact them. We talked through coherence, commitment, partnerships, aligned systems, talent development and growth, as well as culture. And we did a self-assessment to help you think about the existing strengths in your context, but also areas where you might want to, or some levers that you may want to pull in the future. We also talked through Kotter's dual operating system, talking about the balance between hierarchical decision-making, which is really, really great for technical challenges, whereas those adaptive challenges might be better suited for a network approach, which I'm so excited to build upon in today's session. Today is really going to be about deeply understanding the network within National School District. One last framework that we'll dive into as we talk through the panel is once you're in a networked approach, when you are no longer in a hierarchy, it can get unclear as to who is doing what. So there'll be one new framework to chew on today, and this one's very simple. It's called the Darcy framework, and it simply helps you quantify or document the different roles and responsibilities in a networked project. So each letter in Darcy stands for a different title. So decision maker, accountable, responsible, consulted, and informed. And this is a very lightweight way in 5 minutes or less that you can clearly determine and make transparent the different roles in a project. And we've actually broken apart the panelist project today so you can see that in action. But we hope that this framework might be useful as you begin thinking about how to distribute leadership in your own context. So with that, I am going to turn it over to our esteemed panelists to introduce themselves and introduce their story. We're going to start with Dr. Brady from National School District. Welcome, Dr. Brady. It's so wonderful to have you here today.
Sorry, I had a technical difficulty getting my microphone off. Glad it wasn't an adaptive challenge right now. Hi, everyone. I am Leangela Brady, and I am the proud superintendent of National School District, and super excited to be here with you today to talk about National School District and some of the work that we've been experiencing within the context of distributed leadership. So you can see just on the slide that we're located here in San Diego, just 5 miles south of downtown. So if you're ever here in a conference in San Diego and you want to visit National School District, please feel free to reach out, and we'd love to host you and bring you around and see some of the things you might hear about today. We are the second oldest school district in San Diego County. We celebrated our sesquicentennial just over that COVID period of time. We're 154 years old. And as a side note, I do like to share that I'm the first woman superintendent in all of that time. So breaking barriers down here in National. We do have in our 10 elementary schools, all 10 of them are Title I schools, and 90% of our students are what we call unduplicated here in California, which means all of our students are either low socioeconomic, English learners, foster youth, or homeless youth. And with homeless, that comes with multiple families living together in the same environment. So some challenges, but also some wonderful things to be proud of. As a school district working on distributed leadership, we have been able to be recognized as a California Green Ribbon School District for sustainability. We're one of only 4 in the state that got recognized at the gold level, and the only one in San Diego this year. To join others before us, but only one this year that was named gold. We became 2 years ago the first elementary only heart safe district in the nation, where all of our students and our staff learn CPR, and our students actually take the leadership role in training every year, hands-only CPR to all of their peers and the adults in their schools. All of our schools have been recognized by the California Coalition for Positive Behaviors and Intervention Supports, PBIS, and 7 of our 10 schools got the platinum level, which is the highest level last year. So this year we're really we're sharing those best practices and aligning our systems and learning from each other so that we can get all of our schools to that platinum level and have those systems in place for all students. And also we're working on being recognized as America's Healthiest Schools. So again, we have about 4,000 students, 10 schools, and super proud to be working on that. And one thing that I'll end with before turning it over to my colleagues to share is that we have spent the last 2 years really working on implementing our profile of a national school district learner and taking our vision of exceptionally prepared learners, innovative and compassionate world citizens, and working with our staff, our parents, our students, our community to really define what outcomes we want to see students achieve to be able to say that they are exceptionally prepared learners, innovative and compassionate world citizens. And we're building on that this year in working with Learner-Centered Collaborative and our learning models. So what shifts do we need to take that everybody can commit to actually make these outcomes a reality? And so we'll be talking a little bit more about that when we talk about networking and our distributed leadership model. So lots to be excited about, but I promised I would save some of it for the other slides. So I'll turn it over now to Brittany. Oh no, I'm going to turn it over to Liz.
Yeah, I can
You'll
jump right in here. Thank you, Dr. Brady. One, it's been an absolute blessing to work with you, Dr. Brady. I think just want to, from even your brief comments now, just acknowledge the powerful systems leader that you are, and acknowledging like how much you just celebrated and leaned into the strengths of your team, expressing the commitment and pride you have to your district. So I'm grateful to be able to work alongside you. And I just wanted to name here on this slide that we, UCSD and Learner-Centered Collaborative, teamed up. We called ourselves Better Together to work together in support of National School District this year. And want to acknowledge that part of that is that this work was intended to support a state planning grant for community schools. And National wanted to really think about how can we do that in a really robust way and lift the voices of our community across various roles and responsibilities to understand what are the hopes and desires of our community, and leveraging the strengths of UCSD and their tremendous, incredibly skilled kind of research talents, their ability to lift and leverage validated metrics, to engage teams in meaning making, and to move to support moving from data to action, with kind of the partnership of Learner-Centered Collaborative, deeply rooted in relationships and systems work, and trying to make connections, not just to this work of the state planning grant, but to the amazing systems transformation work that Dr. Brady is leading. And so pulling together the strengths of research and practice in support of these goals that National City has for their community. Anything you'd like to add there? And we have Dave Troutman and Alan Daly here on the call with us. Dr. Daly, anything you'd like to add?
No, that was really beautifully said, Liz. Do you want us to talk a little bit about some of the research approach that we took, or was there anything else you wanted to add on that, Liz?
Please go ahead, Alan, if you're ready to move into that space.
Sure, that sounds great. So first of all, let me just say, just to reiterate, Leangela is fabulous. Her staff welcomed us. They took on this sort of extra management of helping us out at UCSD and LCC for collecting a massive amount of data that you're about to hear about. And I just also want to recognize LCC as a partner. Liz was fabulous on all kinds of levels. And so it was really a joy for us to work together in partnership with National to execute on this really important work. At UCSD, in the work that we do, as Liz highlighted, we really put relationships front and center. My work over the last 20 years has been deeply rooted in this idea around social networks and social network analysis. And that's what drives our work. We really center and position relationships and then work around those and with those in order to help support systems become even stronger. Leangela just did a really nice job sort of encapsulating all the wonderful relationally oriented things that they have going on in National. You're about to hear a little bit more about that, but certainly we saw all kinds of evidence about that. To give you an idea about the science of the work that we undertake, we've put together a couple graphs here. I'm just going to quickly explain them, and then you're going to hear more about this idea around networks when I turn it over to my dear friend and colleague, Dave, who'll talk a little bit more about the data collection and analysis that's coming up in a moment. But this represents a couple of elementary schools. They're both in the same district. These are not National School District schools. These are other kinds of schools. And when you look at these are network graphs. And each of the dots here represents a teacher. You'll hear more about the ones from National. They represent leaders in the National School District. And the lines between them represent the exchange of who do you turn to for best practices. You could see the school at the left. Each of the colors represents a teacher at a particular grade level. So you could see those teachers that are in blue are interacting quite a lot. You can see the line of dots off to the left-hand side. Those are teachers that didn't turn to anybody for best practices, nor did anyone turn to them. So you could see that's lost social capital in this particular school. They didn't have somebody to connect to. If we contrast that to a school that's just a couple miles down the road, which means they're serving a similar student population, you see a very different profile of connectedness. And so the idea is that our networks are really consequential for the work that we want to do. And any change effort like those you heard of from Dr. Brady are always layered on top of an existing base state of relationships. And it's often that existing base state of relationships which determines the uptake or the speed at which change can happen. So the networks that we have, the way that we distributed leadership happens through and with people. And if we don't have those connections in place, it's really hard to do the work. What we loved about seeing in National was that they cared so deeply about these relationships and they centered them to really make a difference. So you'll hear a little bit more about that data, but just to give you an idea, we're approaching things from a very social network standpoint. Next slide, please, Brittany. And so I'm going to flip this back to Dr. Brady, who's our resident decision maker.
Right. And I decided that Liz was going to explain to everyone the Darcy model.
That's correct. Thank you, Dr. Brady. So in the Darcy model, or in our collaboration, our research practice partnership, we did take on various roles to ensure that we were successful in the project. And Dr. Brady, knowing her system and what her system needs and the individuals in her system, was the designated decision maker, ensuring that what we were doing was in alignment with Dr. Brady's vision and the vision of her community, and that we were aligning our work in support of the work that they are leading. You can also see that there's 3 accountable people. It does say under accountable, this single person is accountable for making this project happen. But what I want to name is that this was a unique partnership, and there's 1 person there from each of the organizations. So 1 from National School District Lynette, who was an incredible partner in this work and helped to ensure that we were connected to schools and that surveys were getting completed that we had the information that we needed. So really a tremendous partner. Mimi, who is from UCSD and not on this call, but a tremendous partner in our collaboration, and myself. So 3 people accountable, 1 from each organization, given our dynamic of collaboration. And then we had those responsible. So we have UCSD and LCC partnering to ensure that we are doing the work on the project, that we are formulating the instruments that we're going to use, the surveys, the focus group questions, implementing those, getting the survey data that we need to support the work that National was leading around the implementation or the state planning grant for community schools, and that work is getting back to the school so that it can be utilized. We consulted a number of people. You can see some school photos there that we consulted various people from the site level, from principals, district office leadership, as well as the board, and making sure that everyone was included and involved in the process, and then informed. We prepared impact reports and supported presenting at the board to ensure that the community was updated and aware of the amazing work that had taken place, and that their voices and the time that they spent to contribute their voice was mattered, and that we listened, and that we were reflecting back what we heard to the community at large.
Thanks, Liz. Now that we've talked about the structure of the team, Dave, I wonder if you would talk to us a little bit about the actual work itself. What did you do?
Great question. And I want to sort of situate this in some of the things that we've spoken about. So as we're thinking about this as like a needs and assets assessment for community schools, as well as, you know, what Alan talked about earlier with the tale of 2 schools, is that like 2 schools might have the same sets of technical resources, or 2 districts, or 2 sort of organizations. But some of the questions that we're really interested in is not just like what resources, what assets are available, but how are those assets or resources shared? How are they distributed? How are they mobilized to support change? And so when we thought about this needs and assets assessment, we turned to some existing sort of like tools that generally were pretty technical, and we decided to take this more relational approach. And so that wasn't just in the data collected, but how we collected the data. So our first step was to sit and talk to community members, teachers, classified staff, parents, students. We sat outside schools and talked to folks. We then synthesized what we found from these smaller listening sessions. We looked at some of the literature on community schools and thought about what might be good to measure. Then we brought that back to some school sites and had staff engage with that to check our understanding. And only then did we start thinking about, okay, here are the quantitative survey tools that we're going to use to get a general picture of the relevant needs and assets in National. So we ended up collecting survey data from over 1,000 participants, a large majority of the certificated or teaching staff, a good portion of classified staff, a pretty solid representation of families of students, and then a very large representation of site and district leadership. And so from there, if we go to the next slide, we thought about how do these pieces of data across these data sets from different stakeholders speak to all 4 of these pillars, right? Family and community engagement, collaborative leadership and practice, integrated student supports, and expanded learning times and opportunities, these sort of 4 pillars of community schools. And while they all speak to each other, we're going to emphasize here some of the top 2. That's going to be some of the questions that we'll be talking about shortly. But ultimately, what we want to do when we're mapping this out is not just understand technical resources, but also the cultural dynamics that shape how they are used in schools. And so by way of example, we can take a look at the next slide where we did some social network mapping. Now, earlier, Alan shared some examples from schools. This is a picture of a district map where the red would be central office leaders and the blue would be site leaders. So each of those little squares is a person, and each of the lines between them represents an advice relationship about who do you go to for work-related advice. And some of the things we can see on the right with the sort of network statistics, I'll start at the bottom and go up. 1, the average degree means that like on average, every person has at least 6 people they go to on a daily or weekly basis for advice, which is a pretty strong showing of sort of interconnected support. We see reciprocity. So that's the sort of, if I go to you, you also say you go to me, is also quite high. It's 25%, which means a quarter of these advice relationships are reciprocal or reciprocated. And then the density is 20%, which is really reflecting out of the total possible connections, how many people are you, or what is the total possible relationships versus the actual relationships. And here we obviously don't want 100% because that means that all you're doing is talking to other people all the time. But we also don't want it to be too low because that means you're sort of disconnected and isolated. So here, I think, as we always say, researchers are not great at answering questions, but we're really good at asking questions. And one of the best uses of these types of maps is not to say like, this is how we are, or who is that? How do we, it's more about thinking like, here's a reflection of the structure as it is. And I wonder what would happen if we did X, or I wonder why this is the case. And so we focus less on like individuals, like who is that and who is that, but more on what are the dynamics that are driving this type of picture. And so here we see like two groups of blue nodes, which would be principals. And one of the incredible things that Dr. Brady has been thinking about is what are the ways that we can encourage and create more dense connections between principals and asking the right questions, getting them to share best practices. And so again, we're leveraging what is already a strong network, but really intentionally to think about how are we really deploying our assets in the ways that are most going to impact children and really leveraging that local expertise in our community. Alan, do you want to add something on that?
Yeah, I just want to point out that, a lot of folks think, oh, I've got a pretty good idea of what the social network is or the sets of connections in their relationship. And it turns out people are only about 30% accurate in those perceptions. So rigorous kind of systematic data collection is really important to do. And that's why partners are also really good in this process, because this is something that we can help support and do in our Better Together team. The other thing I want to stress is that we think about these relationships and assets as being hidden in plain sight. We're all aware of our relationships and the sets of connections that we have, but some of the social structure, meaning the way things are organized, aren't always as clear until we have this kind of a data. So I really applaud National for saying, all right, let's take a look at this. Let's map this out and let's try to make some sense of where we are. Thanks, Dave.
Well, this makes me very curious. I'm going to jump in with a question, if that's okay. I'm thinking back, let me see if I can navigate back to these 4 pillars. You'd mentioned, Dave, that family and community engagement and collaborative leadership and practices are, very deeply connected to distributed leadership. Arguably, all 4 could be. But I'm curious about your learnings for these 2 elements. And this would be both for Dr. Brady and the UCSD team. And Dr. Brady, if you want to start us off, I'm curious, what did you learn? What are your takeaways on these top 2 topics?
Yeah, well, I think it goes back to what we were just hearing from Dave and Alan, in that what we believe are the interactions. We only know certain things. Maybe they're on the surface, and so I kind of had some reminders from previous trainings that I've had in the past about Johari's window, right? Where there are things that that everybody knows. There's things that that no one knows. And then there's things like that you don't know and no one knows. And this asset mapping behind the scenes really helped us kind of break apart some of those assumptions that we had. And I would say uncovered some biases that we had. And for example, when you were talking about community connections, right? One of the questions that came out of our survey data that we were trying to get to the bottom of was what gets in the way of, student achievement. And I think one of the things that came out of that on the staff side was that parents can't help their kids at home or have trouble helping their kids at home. Maybe our parents live in poverty and have lots of jobs, and there's assumptions that because they're second language learners, maybe they can't help their students at home. And for the parents, it was opposite. Like, how confident are you of helping your children at home? That came out super high. Parents felt very confident in that. Yet we had this bias of we believed that that was something that was a barrier to student achievement. And on the parent side, their barrier was more along like relationships between others at school and maybe some bullying that was happening at school. But with our PBIS awards, we were thinking we don't have bullying, so to speak, at schools. And so just uncovering those different types of things through this process really was eye-opening. And then with the network maps, to take it a step further, we started to look at kind of the interactions on a daily basis. How often do you go to somebody else for assistance? And we had a very dense map. I actually think this might be our map, and I'm gonna sell myself out, right? Did you say this is one of our map? Okay. So this was one we were super proud of. We were like, oh, this is amazing. We have lots of people talking to each other. And then when we saw our next map, which was how often do you go to another person for things that advance equity in the institution or help bring up student achievement, right? Sharing best practices with one another. We saw kind of a 50% decrease in the density of our map, which when I did this with my leadership team at Leadership Retreat, an aha that came out is, hey, we're really good to go to somebody to say, hey, some kids were vaping in the bathroom. How many days of a suspension would you give this student? Sharing an idea of, I'll give them a 2-day suspension for that, versus, hey, we had some students that were vaping in the bathroom. What are some proactive steps that you're taking at your site that are keeping, I noticed you had no suspensions for vaping. Like, what are some of the things that you're doing, maybe with parents or with staff that keep students from engaging in that kind of behavior at school? We are less, we found in our network mapping, we're less likely to go to each other to share that problem and seek that solution than we are about just technically, can you just give me what you would give in terms of the consequence? So I think those are some of the things that we're learning from this process of Better Together, hearing about our data, and looking at our network maps.
Amazing. Well, you sort of hinted at a few next steps, but that's actually my question. Where do you go from here, right? We've got some, I don't mean to minimize, but dots on paper, right? That seems to be sparking some very powerful conversations. Are there any concrete action items or next steps you plan to take?
Well, this is where I'm going to lean in and say that in a minute. Every year we start off with a theme for the year. So when I wanted to share my vision, we had the Be Exceptional campaign for exceptionally prepared learners. And then the next year we shifted to which was talking about the Italian Renaissance and interactions between people to spark innovation or compassion. And then we went to for world citizens, and each year we build on that. So as I was sitting with Dave and Alan, hearing about the data that they were going to be sharing with my principals, I said, I never do this. I never tell anybody what next year's theme is going to be, but I told them, I am going to have next year's theme be in sync. And so this is a button that we created. I don't know how close I'm going to get. So it says sync, but you can see the word in is within the word sync. So it's in sync is this year's theme. And it's really kind of adding a transparency layer to this idea that we have to be better and more intentional about building our networks and going back to those enabling conditions. Like, how do we build systems that align that then create that coherence that we need to build throughout the organization? And so that's just one way, is having everybody talk about being in sync. And how do we stay in sync when we have 10 different schools with 10 varied needs? And knowing your place in the network and being able to know your community and being able to then stay aligned to the district. A second thing is I have a brand new assistant superintendent of educational services who has been part of the learner-centered collaborative. I think, Alan, you might have even been her chair for her dissertation, if I'm not mistaken. And so already having some knowledge about how the Darcy model works. She's been a great asset to come into our organization and share some of the things that have worked with her in the past. And so one thing is sharing data dashboards together and seeing where people, not just at the end of the year, but along the way, and where people have had success, and sharing the action steps that have led to that success to build that intermediate map. And so we now have, I took what I used to do for leadership evaluation, kind of in a narrative format, turned it into this data dashboard like Laura shared from her work in the past. And now we have 3 overarching goals in the district: student achievement, engagement, which could, in this case, this year, it's student engagement, but it could be parent engagement, it could be staff engagement, and then culture and climate. And as a leadership team, we are sitting together in cohorts of like leaders, whether you're a district office leader, a principal leader, because our principals did really well in engaging with district office, but not necessarily with each other. So how can we force some of those collaborations so that they can learn those skills and strategies from each other and build that coherence with each other? So that's the second thing that we're doing. And then the third, we haven't talked about the personal network map. When we got to our third network map in our leadership team, it was, how well do you know each other personally? And that was like 50% less than the how well do we share best practices versus the really networked one, which was just how good we are at talking to each other. So we're real good about talking shop with each other, but not necessarily sharing best practices or even knowing each other personally. And what we learned about at our leadership retreat was some people felt that they were very private people and didn't feel comfortable necessarily sharing private information with each other. And so we had a long conversation around, is knowing that everybody likes the Padres in our group personal or private? Is sharing the kind of coffee or morning drink you have personal or private? And we found that we could get to know each other more personally without necessarily sharing private information that we want to keep private. And so now we're doing these connections before content, another thing we learned from the Learner Center Collaborative work. And I had all of the leaders sign up to work in pairs to do kind of that icebreakery activity to get to know each other more personally before every one of our leadership meetings. And we had our very first one at our last meeting. It was, everybody was laughing. It was not work related at all, but it definitely centered us around knowing more personal information. So those are just 3 examples of things that we have done to build our networks, to build coherence, to get back to those enabling conditions so we can better distribute leadership in National School District based on the work we've done and the data we learned about ourselves.
If I can just surface something that I'm hearing Dr. Brady talk about, I think it's like the importance of symmetry, or what people call modeling, or I can hear Dr. Kitty Martin in my ear saying teachers create what they experience, right? But that it's really about this sort of symmetry between the types of systems we want to see in classrooms we should be having at the school level and at the central office level. And I'm going to add to that in the context of this sort of research practice work, also like as the sort of the LCC UCSD team, thinking intentionally about the ways that we are working together as a team with National School District. And I want to acknowledge in that our tremendous colleague, Mimi Lockton, who's a brilliant researcher who has also been part of this work to build us closer together personally, closer together professionally, and closer together in like this like rigorous academic discourse that really pushes everybody on the team to engage critically.
There's a wonderful question in the chat. Thank you, Chantel. And Dave, thank you also for those additional thoughts. Chantel, I'm curious, Chantel is curious, did you have someone or a framework to support that private versus personal discussion, or did that organically bubble up? Dr. Brady, tell us more.
Yeah, that completely organically bubbled up. So In my leadership retreat, I was, trying to create this, what does it mean to be in sync? It doesn't mean the old No Child Left Behind days where I walk out of my, Dave's classroom, I walk into Liz's classroom, and they're both teaching page 75 in the benchmark curriculum, right? It's not speaking in sync. I showed a little video of, I don't know if you saw it, it went viral on TikTok and on other social media platforms about these two twins, and they actually speak in sync. If you haven't seen it, I think they're from Britain and they're hysterical. That's not what in sync is, right? It's about being on the same page, rowing in the same direction, helping each other to move the organization along for a common goal. I think even Devin said in one of these leadership series, like distributed leadership isn't about who has control, it's about supporting, or creating those enabling conditions and those supports and to help people move forward. So I built the network maps in as part of talking about being in sync, as part of the storytelling. And I did not realize the rich conversations that was going to come out. So here I was preparing a leadership retreat for setting the stage for the work we're going to do together. Yet I spent more time learning from that leadership retreat this year than any other year because I spent more time in activities and discussions than in actually, culling information that I wanted them to know and memorize and bring back. And so what I heard in terms of feedback from my leadership team was this was the best leadership retreat we ever had. And I actually took a vacation right before I went, right before the week of leadership retreat, and was worried that I wasn't going to have enough time to prep. And so it was interesting. It was the least amount of prep, the most amount of discussion, and people found it was the best. And I think it was because I let go of that control of controlling the message and doing more of what Dave was just saying, asking more of the questions and getting to the bottom of why don't we know each other? We're a very small school district. We're very tight. We like each other, but we don't know each other very well personally. And I think organically that came out, and it was very interesting.
Yeah.
Learned
I'd
a
like to
lot.
build on something Dr. Brady was just talking about. We've been doing this work in a wide variety of school districts across the globe, and we hear that same message iterated over and over again. And I think it's because what you said earlier, Leangela, about No Child Left Behind is exactly what predominates us. For so long, we put the human capital element first, which is like the technical stuff we need to do, the training and the PD, and that's always been how we've initially begun. And we have background this social capital, our ability to see the assets and relationships in one another. The work that we've been trying to do for many years now, and the work that you're beautifully exemplifying at this moment, is a flip of that. You lead with the social capital and the human capital follows, right? But we have not taken that model because everyone thinks it's not a good investment to spend the time trying to figure out what your favorite coffee drink is in the morning. But it turns out when we start conversations that are based in data, that are about the relationships that we have, that catalyzes conversations that are extraordinary and are atypical in organizations, particularly educational organizations. We're all about getting stuff done without the realization that actually building these relationships is the stuff to get done, right? The other elements come and grow and develop from that. And I think your description of what we observed in National is exactly spot on. It's a lead with the social capital. It doesn't mean we're going to ignore the PD and the training, the technical elements of our job. Of course, we're going to attend to those and do good work for kids in our community. But unless we really lean into this idea of starting with our social capital as our foreground, right, not our background, we're not going to make the kind of progress in education that we think we can make. So thank you for being such a beautiful exemplar and all the work you've been doing in National with that. And to Dave's point, I think in our relationship with LCC and being better together, we tried to do that too. We always led with our relationships first, and then we got the work done. And that's what I think is the sort of secret hidden power of what we're talking about today. If we really want to talk about assets and distributing leadership and knowledge and understanding.
I also want to highlight really quickly, if I can, Britt. I loved the example you gave, Dr. Brady, of your leadership retreat and how you listened deeply, and how you felt the power of that experience. And I wanted to name that in this distributed leadership model, like when we acknowledge and honor and celebrate the strengths of each individual in the system, and we invite folks in to contribute those strengths in really meaningful ways, how the work gets done because we all own it. We're all co-owners and designers of the future vision of what we're hoping to achieve. And that really then it allows for everybody to lean in their areas of expertise, and to be a part of the solution. And one of the things that Dr. Brady mentioned, we're moving into next year, and this comes back to your question, Brittany, about what is this catalyzing for the future, is as we move into the learning model and designing the learning model, bringing together a cross-functional guiding coalition, that invites in the voices and perspectives of folks across the system, and asking for all of those folks to invite in their community members' voices into the process, so that as we design that learning model that connects to the profile that Dr. Brady shared, we're co-constructing and we're doing with and not to. And I think that is important in keeping people connected, and moving the vision forward, is that co-ownership, co-design, and doing with our community.
Incredibly powerful. I'm putting myself in the place of, or along with the participants, and my brain is just a whirling. So I think at this point we're going to jump into breakout rooms. But I want to sanity check an idea. I feel like we're having a bit of an Inception moment. Do you remember that Leonardo DiCaprio movie where it was like a dream within a dream? I think we were talking about network maps, right? We're talking about distributed leadership, but there's like a hidden message that I want to put a finer point on. It sounds to me, as someone who I wasn't part of this project, that another way that you distributed leadership was by bringing in an outside perspective. And I'm curious, Dr. Brady, before we jump into breakout rooms, can you talk a little bit about the value of having outsiders do this research? Did that change things? Did you get to a different place? Curious about your decision to bring in research partners for this work.
Yes, and what I didn't share is that our leadership retreat was actually 2 days, and Liz and Leadership Collaborative actually came in the second day and started talking about what does this mean for instruction. So I think that having that ebb and flow of having a thought partner like Leadership Collaborative come in and start looking, we've been partners with Learner Center Collaborative for many years now, to be able to say, what we really need to do is some asset mapping, and then to have that network and those connections to UCSD, to Dr. Daly and and Dr. Troutman, soon to be, all these different ways of taking yourself in and out of the work is part of that distributed leadership, right? So we had a lot of assumptions, and you can't unlock those assumptions or those biases if you don't take yourself out of the equation and have somebody else come in and do that listening. I find that what people tell me oftentimes is either can be compliance based. I know she wants this, so I'm going to tell her what I think she wants to hear. Or even pleasing, like they want to please me. So they'll do things that please me, as opposed to maybe asking a question that pushes back or challenges the idea on the table. I always tell people, if you smile and nod, I think you like what I'm saying, and I'm going to do more of it. I'm going to say more of it. So if you have a better way that we can approach this work, I need to hear it from you. And I found myself a few times during the presentation from the Better Together team, either trying to guess who's in that map, or how do I fix that map and that school, or, well, I know exactly who said that quote, and I'm not sure that's completely accurate, to what are the trends that they're trying to share with me right now? How does this particular comment fit in with the overall picture? And how do we fix the system itself or get better at the system to allow for less of those types of comments or questions or wonderings. They were obviously weaker parts of our system in general. So I don't know if that answered your question, Brittany, but yeah, I think, yeah.
Definitely did. Absolutely did, without a doubt. Well, with that, I'm going to open up some breakout rooms. And as always, during your breakout conversation, I have a prompt for you, but I also invite you to think of additional questions for our panelists. Sometimes as you're chatting and making meaning, great questions come up a little easier than thinking of them in isolation. So I'm going to open breakout rooms. Let me share my screen really quickly and show you the prompt. In true networking fashion, we just want to think about your leadership potential in yours context. So in whatever format feels most helpful to you, on a napkin, a Post-it, a spreadsheet, or if you're nerdy like me and you want to draw a mind map out, I'd love for you to think about those around you that you can tap to include in a leadership decision. Thinking about Dr. Brady and Liz just talked about next year, the learning model in National, they're forming a council of all sorts of different stakeholders and empowering them as decision makers and as feedback cycles and feedback loops to make decisions. And so I want you to think about the folks around you, think about their strengths, and then start to think about where your gaps are. Are there spaces where maybe you want to bring in a third-party expert, or maybe there's a group of parents that you haven't yet been able to make that connection with, and start to discuss as a breakout room how you can bring as many voices to the table as is possible. So with that, I'm going to invite you to hop into breakout rooms, and we'll come back together in about 15 or 20 minutes. I will see you all shortly. I hope you had a really productive breakout room conversation. As always, we want to invite you to share any golden nuggets, new ideas in the chat or aloud. I'm going to change the settings such that you can come off of mute if you're interested in sharing more broadly with the group. But this is just some time for you all to reflect, share out from your breakouts, and perhaps most importantly, ask questions of our panelists. So just going to open the floor and see what questions and ideas bubble up. Oh, and it looks like perhaps when I close the breakout rooms, I cut someone off. So please feel free to continue the conversation from the breakout room. It seems like maybe Mr. Oyegoga was sharing something. Feel free to continue.
Okay, thank you very much, Brittany. Actually, I was kind of trying to share with the group why I signed up for this webinars training on distributed leadership. Actually, my school context here at Wesley High School, there's this friction. There's a friction in terms of communication flow between students, management, or between staff, management, and it kind of causes a clog on the dynamics of bringing about the objectives of the organization. And as a subhead, I'm a head of ICT science. I understood that this was not helpful in building the school culture. And that was why I intimated the management team that why not we sign up for this training just to shift the lens from our personal perspectives and see it in a wider and broader perspective, whereby maybe in a different context like that of the United States, and see how things are done over there, and maybe kind of get some insights. So I think it's working. It's working because from today's session, I've been able to see that relationship, one aspect which we have really neglected, because we may just be looking at the formalities, how we do things, how do we go about, that is the straightforward way of handling things. but never consider maybe the personal peculiarities of the people in the system. So I think it's working. This signing up for this webinar is working because I've seen that this nugget of relationship, understanding it, being in sync, like how Brady shared with us, being in sync doesn't necessarily mean revealing personal dispositions, but understanding the poise of someone towards an issue can help in maybe resolving conflicting perspectives. I think this is something that we are keen into, and we'll see how we can integrate this approach in our leadership operations in Wesley High School. So thank you very much for giving me the floor to share this perspective. Thank you very much.
Well, you're getting some snaps and applause from the panelists. I'm so excited. That is incredible news. I'm happy you've got a lot of experts here in the room that are happy, I'm sure, to share advice and tips. And it is messy work, right? People are messy, but it is meaningful, impactful work. And we wish you well on your journey. Amazing. Well, what other questions or ideas are bubbling up? Or Dr. Brady, did you want to say something
I
to
want
this?
to react to that and just say something I didn't share was how old I am and all those great things. But this is my 30th year in education. It is my 20th year as an administrator and my 10th year as a superintendent in the same district. And to have that same aha that you just were having today in my 10th year, sometimes we think we know our systems so well that just being open, I gave you the applause snaps because I think it's awesome that you are saying, how might we look at our system differently and our relationships differently and how we interact with each other differently? That can happen regardless of the tenure that people have in organizations or the experience people bring. Sometimes we only think it's important when we're new in a system, or if somebody is new to a role or a job and we take on that mentorship role for somebody who's kind of entering the field. But I just wanted to applaud you and react to that to say good for you for being open-minded to that and for walking away with a concrete step from a webinar. That's sometimes hard to do, and great for you.
Amazing. All right, well, let's see what other questions are on folks' mind. And it can also be color commentary, right? Thoughts, reactions, just keep the dialogue going. I'll give that awkward pregnant pause and see what bubbles up for folks. Oh, it seems like Chantel is curious about the questions on the survey. So Dr. Brady or maybe Dave or Alan, do you want to talk a little bit about the questions that you engaged the community with?
Yeah, I can start a little bit on the sort of the technical components. So we started with just some like super open-ended questions about in our sort of informal conversations about like, tell us about your experience, a time you felt you really belonged, talk about sort of what school is like. And from there, we listened to what we heard. We synthesized those with the 4 pillars, and we identified some constructs in research. And so when I say that, I mean like there are validated survey scales that have been used that touch on those ideas. And so a scale is a set of items that in this case have been used over and over by researchers and generally are believed to collectively represent the idea that they express. And so we identified some scales and then broke that into constructs. And so some of the items ended up being a little bit repetitive, but we ended up settling on a scale on family and community involvement, collective involvement for staff, belonging, collegiality, independence, all of these sort of trying to understand like to what extent do people feel like they can make decisions? To what extent do people feel like they can reach out to others? To what extent do people feel like they belong in the community? Again, these more cultural, relational components, as well as some of the items that talked more broadly about sort of perceptions of school. And then we had some open-ended questions that we used, we coded qualitatively. So Dr. Brady spoke to some of these questions around, what gets in the way of learning? And we asked that for all stakeholder groups, so we could get a sort of a portrait of what each group believed was sort of like the core things. And in addition to that, what supports are needed. And so it was sort of a collection of a variety of different things. So we've got these quantitative scales that are validated in research that then we analyzed and compared. We broke those into sub constructs, and then we also had the qualitative data that we analyzed and sorted into themes.
And to add to that, I'll say that I loved that we got the data in multiple ways. So we got the pretty bar graph broken down by which group and how each group answered each of those questions. But we also got things called like a data story. I don't know if you can see this. I should have had like slides, but we got data stories. We got network maps, and it was cute how you put it all together and like looking at different parts of the elephant, and how important it is that when you are looking at data, that you're looking at it from all different angles, or you only get that one perspective.
I'll also add, we created a district level report, but we also gave a site level report to each site leader. Dr. Daly and I sat down with each principal and walked them through that, again, to promote being in sync, right? So having an opportunity to like give them time and space to process, as well as to orient them to like, this is the general direction that we sort of see folks going in the district. And so these are some items that you might want to sort of think about, examine sort of how you're living into this in your practice.
And I'll add one more thing. It was difficult at times not to feel defensive or to rationalize why somebody might have responded one way or another, or try to guess who said what, or I've heard that a million times from the labor group or such, but to really look at it from a trend view and what can we strengthen within our system to be more aligned and to have better systems, those enabling conditions that you heard about earlier in the webinar and within this series. That's really how we're trying to approach the work, and trying to not focus in on, well, that's not true, or that is true. It's true for somebody. And if it's true for somebody and it comes out in a story, a data story, that means there's enough of a trend that we have to figure out where that's coming from and help to make that shift together.
Well, I cannot think of a better note to close on. That summed it up so perfectly, like validating the stories, the lived experiences, elevating them, and being curious and proactive rather than reactive is the dream state that we all want to inhabit as we explore data from our communities. I want to extend a heartfelt thank you to our panelists. Your story inspired me, and I know all of our participants. I'm going to go into the less exciting, laundry list of closing us out. But as you can see in the chat and the emotion, the little emoji reactions, they all appreciated your stories today as well. As always, I'm just going to close us out with a request for feedback, right? This is very meta. We just talked about a survey. So let me launch this poll. My goal is 100% participation. Please do know I use this poll to help inform the design for next week's session. So if there's anything that we could do to make this more meaningful or more impactful, please don't hesitate to let me know. The poll should be live now, and I will look forward to seeing that feedback. And as you're filling it out, I'll close us out with a couple of next steps. All right, so next up, Monday, we'll come together for part 4 of this webinar series. And also just a friendly reminder that we will be in New Orleans at the end of October if you plan to attend the Full Scale Institute. It's a conference that used to be called the Aurora Symposium, but they have rebranded. So if you're there, please feel free to come by and say hello. We'd love to see you IRL and talk more about distributed leadership. And as always, if you have ideas, questions, need a resource, want an email address of any of the panelists from today's session, please don't hesitate to reach out to us at learnercentered.org or email us at collaborate@learnercentered.org. As always, I wish you an amazing week. Have a wonderful first week of August, and we'll see you next Monday. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, everybody.